Does F1 actually need the US? Like when we say need, that denotes, in my opinion, existential, as in without the US, the sport wouldn't exist. Is that really the case? I'm just posing a question.
I
I don't,
mean, the money I
does it
think it
does it
needs.
need it? Does it?
It doesn't need what I would call the kind of Americanization of it. Like it doesn't need to start stepping on sort of NASCAR, IndyCar turf in terms of how it markets and brands itself and that. But I think the money is probably fairly important. Um,
Right.
and just because America has such a huge motoring industry and market as well,
Right.
um, it's kind of, I mean, it's always been there in one way or another, because you had Indy 500 and you had the USGP all the way from the 60s to the 80s. But the 90s was kind of the drop off, because there weren't any American drivers except Michael Andretti, and then there was no USGP in the 90s either. Um, so it's always been there in one way or another, but not it just not because it's so Eurocentric. That's why there haven't been as many American drivers, and the American motorsport scene and culture is quite detached from the European one. And sport in general, if you think things like, baseball, basketball, American football, these are things which are not worldwide sports in the same way that association football and stuff like
Correct.
that is. It's yeah, um, that's where America
Correct.
is a bit more kind of culturally isolated on the sporting front.
I think from the perspective where this is the Formula One World Championship, and I think you need to, if you're going to have a World Championship of anything, I think, if you're doing the Jenga World Championship or something, anything like that, and you think about touring places where you'd go, America would absolutely always be included in that conversation, very near the top of the list. There's an argument that if you're having a World Championship, it should go everywhere in the world. And I know we don't currently have a Grand Prix in Africa, and that's something that they've, the FIA and FOM have wanted and spoken about, but it's not turned around anything recently. But I think from a perspective, if you want to show this sport to that whole world and invite the world to have a look at it as well, you need to have that American market in there as well. And I think it's, again, I almost thought you were going to ask whether we needed so many races in America, Kieran. I thought that was where you were going to go. I think a lot
That
of people
too.
forget how big America is. I think a lot of people, myself, are so Euro focused. We could so easily assume how quick it is to get to places, but to travel from one end of America to the other is an insane trek. It's not, if you just had one American race, it wouldn't be feasible for everyone to be able to see it by having those other ones dotted around. I know that's not entirely the reason why that many there, but it gives the people so much more an opportunity to get to go see that sport and experience it.
Well said. I just suppose I prefer to see Mugello and Portimao, and I really wanted Vallelunga to upgrade to a first grade license track, and Potrero de los Funes and Nürburgring and Hockenheim, and I think we need to have racing in the U.S. But I'm seeing reports where Domenicali wants 4 races in the U.S. I mean, I understand it's a massive country, but
One per
that
time
just
zone, I think, is what he's
one
thinking.
per time zone. It's just
Yeah.
it's just it's just this sport has had a core fan base that's from Europe, and it's a shame that none of the European tracks. I think it's ridiculous that some of the core tracks are being spoken about, like Spa and Monaco, as potentially being removed, and instead we're going to add tracks that have no history, and in a market that is relatively new to the scene in terms of being very passionate about F1.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
there
this
has to
was
be a balance. That's all I'm trying to say.
I mean, this was one of the many pushbacks from my manifesto video, because I said that America can have one race, which would be in COTA, and Las Vegas and Miami are cringe, and they can be given to IndyCar. Because it's and people are saying, well, the thing is that for Americans, it is to go from one side of the country to the other is like crossing the whole of Europe. So it is huge in that sense. But and it is, and so it's like, and you have to think of it like each state is like its own country is kind of how you have to analogize it. But it's the thing is the obviously this is a world championship and it's important that we have a fairly even spread, but it's also it's kind of Eurocentric. So because that's where the main fan base is in Europe. All the teams are based in Europe. I mean, obviously they technically have a base in America, but they use the one in Britain more often. Historically, that's where all I mean, the first few seasons, every race was in Europe as well, but that's just a lot. There are lots of reasons for that. It's always going to be biased towards the European market. And obviously, we need America, but we can't. Especially, there are limited spaces on the calendar, and we can't start giving one country like 3 or 4 races at the behest of other ones losing any of theirs. Because I mean, another thing is if you want to throw the geography thing, Australia is basically the same size as Europe, but there's never a thing, oh, we need more than one for people who say are going from Perth, have to fly all the way to Melbourne, because that's like flying from LA to Miami. It's
Right. And
I think
the
F1 does have. Oh, sorry, go on, Karen.
Go ahead, Chicane. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think F1 does have its eye on a heritage and understanding that history. I mean, not entirely related to circuits. There's a very famous quote from when Bernie Ecclestone took over the Brabham team, and I think one of the journalists said to him, what you could call it Ecclestone F1. He said, no, if I took over Marks and Spencers, I wouldn't rename it to Ecclestones. You want to keep that heritage and that history. So I think there are people within F1 who do have that same kind of mindset of understanding that regardless of how often we talk about Spa and Monaco maybe dropping off, I think there's enough people fighting their corner because they understand it's almost the opposite. What we're talking about, F1 is a business, but it's also a sport. And there's people that understand that and want to keep that.
I would really like to. I totally agree with what you just said, by the way, Chicane. But I would really like to better understand, and I suppose I'm calling for a deeper study to be done on the nature of the new fan base that has come into Formula One, and exactly where is this fan base concentrated in. It's probably the U.S. But what kind of fans are these? Because I saw a report this year that social media interactions are down massively in F1. I can't remember the exact number. I think it was something like 30% or more.
I think 40%.
And that 40% and viewership in the US is down. It was down a few months ago, year to date, up to that point a few months ago, almost down 25%, 22 to 25%. So why is that? Why is there suddenly such a huge decline? And the question I'm trying to get at is, are these really racing fans, or are these people who just watch Drive to Survive, and then since the season's boring and there's no drama, or because they got bored of Drive to Survive, they turned off? And that's where the dilemma lies for me. I mean, are we catering to a fan base that doesn't even really care about the racing?
Drive to Survive has extended Ricciardo's career by 5 years.
It has. Yes, it has. It's not a joke. It's disgraceful.
Yeah. It is a very new audience. I mean, I think 2021, a ton of new people got into the sport because that was an exceptional year, but kind of exceptional for the wrong reasons, because so much of it was, to quote Lewis, manipulated. It was very manufactured in so many different ways. I mean, it was a season that shouldn't have happened because without the pandemic, it would have been the 2022 regs. and Lewis wouldn't have had a
Right.
look had a look in for the title. And then obviously they've been comparatively like the first half of 22 was great. Then Leclerc has his Hockenheim 2018 moment in France, and then Max has won everything since then. So yeah, I can understand it's not that there's not the drama because there's still. I mean, the race quality. I'd still say I say is still perfectly good. It's just not happening for the lead. All the good stuff is happening in the midfield, like 30 seconds behind Max, who's barely seen at all in the races.
But Peter, my point is that, you know, if that's happening in the US, I'd like to see how did the Italian fans respond? How did the British fans, you know, the core European fans we know are obsessed with Formula One, no matter if it's the most boring season or the most exciting season. You know, Formula One is almost like a part of the culture in the UK or in Italy. It's such a big sport there. Um, you know, as Americans will talk about college football or the NFL at a dinner table, you know, for decades, people in the UK or Italy will be talking about F1 just about, you know, just as a part of their daily life, you know, and I would really like to see a comparison between, you know, the drop off in audiences this year and, you know, which audience had the greatest drop off. I strongly suspect it's the American audience,
Yeah, I
but
I
I
don't
don't have
think I think the effect is probably not so strong in Europe.
exactly.
Because it's more embedded here, and the thing is, well, obviously as content creators we would all notice if there was a large drop off on viewership and engagement on our channels, and that hasn't been the case as well. So
That's fair.
yeah, from my perspective, I suppose I'm active on F1 Twitter, and F1 Twitter is mostly European people as
Yeah.
well. I don't see so much from Americans on there. But yeah, I mean, I'm not on TikTok so much, and I think maybe that's where a lot more of it's happening in the American market. I don't know.
Maybe.
I mean, I can't
Um,
judge it because we don't know the numbers. I can sort of only judge it from my perspective. But I think even as someone who is an avid fan, you know, I've been watching the sport since 2004.
Mm.
There's a lack of interest on my part as well. You know, I'm not always privy to watch the races live, just to my lifestyle and my other working habits. So I do have what I call sort of phone checker races where it gets to, you know, lap 27, Max is about 3 laps ahead, and I'm more than inclined to just go on BBC Sport and see what the result was, you know, just to see is this worth the rest of my day off to continue watching, or shall I just go, oh yeah, just to confirm there was no other overtaking, nothing else really happened, Ferrari did something silly, that's it.